Gasoline. Powerful stuff. Modern magic. Our lives, our business, our cities are patterned on motor transportation which gasoline has made possible.
A scientific revolutionary and a passionate environmentalist, one man's ambition to tackle the question over the age of the Earth would lead him to discover one of the largest industrial environmental health epidemics of the 20th century. Claire Patterson's discovery of the commercial use of the known poison lead in gasoline would marshal one of the greatest movements against the motor and oil companies to disband lead from gasoline. His stand against quite possibly the most powerful companies in the world would be one of the greatest conquered health epidemics of the 20th century. Born in Iowa, Patterson was already making a name for himself as a young scientist. By the age of 23, he and his wife were working on the Manhattan Project together, and after the war he went to pursue his PhD at the University of Chicago under the direction of Harrison Brown. Realizing the potential for radiometric dating and finding the age of the Earth, in 1948 Brown commissioned Patterson to use this research to find the age of the Earth as part of his dissertation. On the same project, Brown commissioned another grad student, George Tilton. All they had to do was measure the lead-to-uranium ratio with equal accuracy inside zircon crystals whose date had already been established. Once they found this, they would be able to do it for a meteor. But in the early stages of testing, Patterson's measurements on the lead count was completely sporadic, showing 1,000 times more lead than what should have been shown, unlike the uranium count by Tilton, which was always the same. Patterson assumed that this naturally high lead content in the air was contaminating his subjects, and he did everything that he could to sanitize his specimens. This environmental error extended the project by 6 years until Patterson could get an accurate reading by inventing the first ultra-clean room. After this, he found that the Earth was 4.5 billion years old. His extended research on the age of the Earth made him the world's foremost leading expert in lead isotope analysis, and he was sent all over the world on many expeditions by companies to trace the geochemical evolution of lead. On a trip funded by the petroleum industry, Patterson measured the amount of lead concentration in oceans. Under the assumption that lead was occurring naturally in the environment, Patterson's recorded data made no sense, as it completely contradicted this belief. The lead content in the shallow waters was thousands of times higher in the deeper waters. Typically, it takes lead about 100 years for the shallow and the deep waters to mix, but since it was only showing up near the surface, that meant that this high concentration of lead had shown up recently. But what could possibly distribute lead across the globe at this much a quantity? After months of researching, he found it. It was leaded gasoline.
This model shows how just the right amount of fluid containing tetraethyl lead and dye is added to the gasoline.
During the 1920s, the race for increased industrial development and technological advancements saw the rise in motor and oil companies in America. Systems like the assembly line allowed for the mass production of motor vehicles to Americans at an affordable price, and innovations in auto mechanics saw the creation of faster and more reliable cars. These innovations would peak at the creation of the new high combustion engine by General Motors. The engine was one of the most high-functioning commercial engines of its time. However, early in its development, the company saw problems with its standard combustion function, which caused knocking. After tests on the engine, the companies figured out that the problem was with the fuel, so the companies invested in research to increase the octane levels by developing a new fuel compound. At the head of this research was Thomas Midgley. Midgley tried over 10,000 different fuel compounds with gasoline to stop the knocking, and in 1921 he had reported that the discovery of a benzene alcohol mixture would not only stop the knocking, but increase the overall functions of the motor compared to the standard oil used at the time. After he found this new alternative, he continued his research until he made a new discovery, that the element lead mixed with the gasoline also had these properties.
It was discovered that a rare compound of lead, mixed in proper proportions with gasoline, made an ideal anti-knock fuel. Horsepower increased, speed picked up, and the knock was gone.
No man can look at the amazing record of accomplishment here in this research division without confidence that these men are going ahead with an eye to the future, looking for new facts and principles which will make things better and make life easier for all of us.
Within months of this discovery, the most prominent motor and oil companies, Standard Oil and General Motors, combined into a joint corporation, Ethyl, to mass-produce the fuel compound tetraethyl lead. For more than 2,000 years, it has been known that lead was an extremely poisonous element. In its purest form, less than a tablespoon on your skin could kill you or make you go insane. A neurotoxin like this exhausted into the environment would cause extreme consequences to public health, such as impairing the developing brain in children. So when Patterson found out that the motor and oil companies had combined to create the Ethyl Corporation, marketing leaded gasoline as a clean anti-knock compound, he was outraged, and immediately went to work on publishing his findings in the scientific journal Nature. Over the next few years, Patterson would present as much evidence as he could against the oil companies and their lobbying power. He would travel to Greenland to scavenge prehistoric ice cores and compare the lead concentrations to more recent ice cores. He was able to record every single rise in atmospheric lead concentration from 800 BC through the Industrial Revolution to the first usage of tetraethyl lead. He compared the bones of pre-Iron Age mummies and sampled the oceans of the shallow and deep waters once more. His build of empirical data was expressed through numerous scientific papers, showing that no matter where in history you look, the natural lead levels were hundreds of times lower. In his effort to publicize his research, he got the eye of Senator Edmund Muskie, the chair of the Air and Water Pollution Subcommittee. In 1966, he held hearings over the Clean Air Act, raising the question over leaded gasoline. This was Patterson's chance to bring the evidence he had collected into the knowledge of political powers. To succeed, he would have to go against the oil company's favorite weapon, Robert Kehoe. Ever since the first workers in lead plants went insane in 1922, the Ethyl Corporation hired Kehoe to write scientific and medical papers to be used as propaganda against the dangers of lead. For the past 44 years, he had kept the public ignorant from the truth, and now there was someone taking a stand against him. The hearings took place while Patterson was in Antarctica. While he was gone, Kehoe would stand his ground for leaded gasoline, with no worthy opponent to attack his claims, until a week into the hearings, when Patterson unexpectedly showed back up from his trip. The hearings marked the first political involvement in that lead was indeed a danger to humans, dispensed as a waste product in gasoline. Patterson continued to fight Kehoe in the oil industry for another decade, writing scientific doctrine and removing lobbyists from Congress, until as early as 1972, lead was removed from gasoline. By 1978, the entire world began to withdraw from the use of leaded gasoline, and just a year later, in 1979, the lead levels in humans dropped exponentially, more than 80%, proving Patterson once and for all. Patterson had finally done it. He had won. In his efforts to find the age of the Earth, Patterson discovered and gave notice to one of the greatest environmental hazards of the 20th century, and thus gave way to quite possibly the single largest widespread health conquest in history. A year after his death in 1995, the U.S. Clean Air Act banned lead in fuel for vehicles in substitute for alcohol, and eventually, lead was removed from all consumer products.
Claire Patterson was the first and by far the most effective foray into the elaborate scientific defenses that Kehoe and the Ethyl Corporation had put up around the issue. The way he arrived at his conclusion, simply an attempt to use radiocarbon dating that was so badly out of whack that it made perfect sense for him to be a critic. And he carried on. He took his research to the logical conclusion. He didn't just say, well, here's my research and just walk away. He actually encouraged Senator Muskie to hold hearings.
Although Patterson's defeat over the oil companies was undeniably successful, his name and place in history has long been forgotten, perhaps on purpose. Today we are facing the same problems, if not worse, than what Patterson had discovered 60 years ago, and in a way, history is repeating itself. Situations such as the lead water poisoning in Flint and the continual use of leaded gasoline in third world countries such as the Middle East continues to poison thousands, but foreign politics addressing the issue has remained silent. It's the same people using environmentally hazardous methods to create quick cash as they destroy our Earth and the people living on it. The petroleum industry continues to lobby politicians and create fake evidence to keep the public ignorant of the true consequences of their actions. The irony of the situation is that today we still trust an industry who less than 30 years ago knowingly poisoned the world.